Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. We're all here, and it's lovely to have Alice Mattison joining us today. So go ahead, Lloyd, take it away.
Well, it is particularly lovely to have Alice with us today. Um, Probably most of us or most of you um, know Alice better as a fiction writer, as a novelist and short story writer. And if you haven't read her books, you should because they're marvelous. And I think in this in this poem, um, you can see the beginning of the beginnings of a great fiction writer, because the narrative is so interesting and touching and funny and is very much uh, a poem in Alice's voice. So, Alice, are you hi?
Hi, hello, thank you.
And are you, would you read your poem to us?
Yes, I can do that. Thank you very much. It's so kind of you all to do this and to the complexity of it. It's unbelievable. Um, okay. Uh, Hunter Radiation, Hunter Radiation Center, Halloween for Kate. It's the one thing you've asked for. Your medicine now, not hours from now on the way home after this new rigmarole of your x-rays, tests downstairs. But I simply can't find a drugstore. Back at the clinic, I can't even find you again. I'm shown to still another waiting room. It's empty. I sit down. People enter in couple. A man comes in with a gray-haired woman in a purple poncho. She crochets yellow yarn. Then comes a handsome man, curly white hair, and a woman older than he is. She's doing handwork I've never seen. I think it's tatting. Madam, calls the gentleman. He has the voice of a Christmas caroler. Bracing, sure. What a beautiful poncho you're wearing. Did you make it yourself? Oh, do you like the colors? Blue is my favorite color. I look again. No, there's no blue. He's legally blind, says the other man to me, but he even does needlepoint using a special machine. Is that tatting? I can't help asking. Yes, it's tatting, says the man with the voice, pronouncing all the T's. The woman beside him looks up and explains that she is his sister, a widow from Oklahoma. She says, widder. I've never heard that except in the movies. She's come for the winter to see to her brother and is tatting bookmarks for Christmas presents. Tatting's small, easy to slip into a bag. Everything's colorful. Her brother, the patient, wears a red and white gingham shirt. There's only one reason to be here. The elevator door opens. The receptionist cries out before we can see what's there. She pushes buttons. Nurses appear. It's a 4-year-old girl brought in by her parents, dressed as the Easter Bunny. Betsy. Everyone knows her but you and me. You've turned up and are waiting for your next bout with the machine. Absently, you finger your chest. You look like someone being interrupted, still making a point while turning toward the persistent voice. Yes, what? I explain about the drugstore. Betsy's parents tell us that Karen, the radiation therapist, made the bunny hood. The rest of the costume's a pair of pink pajamas. Are you going trick-or-treating tonight? Try and stop her. Karen herself sits down and takes Betsy onto her lap. Feel my pockets. Candy in both of them. The hood is beautifully made of pink felt. You remember the hospital pharmacy. I find it after a search, but they don't take prescriptions intended for the outside. I'm almost in tears, but you snatch the prescription and vanish, bursting in somewhere on your doctor, who writes it up on the other pad. This time it all works. I get the medicine, you swallow it, and you're finally called for your minute behind the door. The medicine won't help, nor will the treatment. You don't even know how to knit. I do, but I'm slow. If I started a sweater for you, it wouldn't be finished in time. And you're so tall, too, such yards of knitting. You're family, you say, but I'm not. My relatives are short, like me. I take you in my arms to comfort you, but it is I in yours. That's it.
Goodness.
Thank you. Um, I love this poem. Um, any, what are your first responses to this? Yes, Nick.
Well, I really enjoyed reading this poem, and I read it many times, and I hope to read it more. I think it's a wonderful combination of humor, mundane daily life, but mixed with sadness, fear, and impending death. Overall, however, uh, with love in the poem for everybody, from right down the list. And I love the list of people, the descriptions. It's all a beautifully crafted poem, and one that is has lots of meaning and lots of beautiful craftsmanship.
Thank you. That's a
Thank you.
wonderful
And
opening statement. Yeah, Ginny,
oh, Ginny, you're muted.
you're muted.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Um, I observed, sort of the change in maybe tone in the poem. First is anxiety, and then that long section, it's very homey and cozy. People are doing things with their hand, and there's pops of color, and there's a very warm feeling between the people. But then after that sort of very warm scene, there's one line that says, "There's only one reason to be here." And things come crashing down with a thud right there, I feel. It's kind
Oh,
of back.
let me just I agree with you. And then I think the fact that that line is its own stanza
Yeah.
really makes it a very large turning point. As you say, it just everything sort of crashes with that
Yeah, I
line.
was engaged with the warmth of the long. There's Christmas carols, gingham. There's a lot of
Yes,
things that have very warm connotations. And then the next part, I feel this kind of a mix of warmth, but becomes a little ominous with the reference to radiation therapist in the machine. I think there's a reference. So it's back to sort of a maybe realistic because as that one line says, there's only one reason to be here, which is tough. And then there's irritation, that building irritation with getting the medicine. And but it ends very wonderfully with I wondered if it starts with all she wants is her medicine, but in the end, I think that the hug is as good, better than the medicine.
thank you. I want to um uh that's great. I want to ask this I wish my video was on because I could hold up the copy of Plowshares that Joyce Passaroff edited. That is where this poem was printed, was published for the first. And I don't know, Alice, was it ever published anywhere else? I'm
It was in an anthology of medical things
uh,
having to do. I think that was prepared for medical people's training. It's a big anthology, lots of things, and it was in there.
oh, a good place for it to
That
be.
was nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Joyce, can you say anything about publishing the poem?
Oh, hi, Alice, and hi, Lloyd. It's wonderful to see both of you. Um, I do remember I'm trying to remember if I asked you, Alice, to send poems, because I think I did ask a number of people to send poems to the issue. And this just seemed to jump out because of its enormous um, sense of fellow feeling among strangers in this waiting room. And, it's sort of in the waiting room in a way, where people are waiting to get their dose of radiation, which may or may not help. We don't know how it helps the other characters in this poem. But the emphasis on the handwork, the wonderful sense of people trying to make something out of nothing, trying to take those threads, whether it's with tatting or with crocheting or with knitting. These are just threads that people have to manipulate in order to create something. And, this is true of human relationships. It's true of, again, these people thrown together in a room who become a company. And if that's part of Alice's sense of narrative to make us care about these characters and curious about them, along with her own friend. And of course, when the child appears, that there's only one reason to be here. And it's one thing for older adults, it's one thing for even the younger adults at this point. I imagine the friend was not the same age as the gentleman who is partially blind. To see a child there is especially excruciating. But we don't see the excruciating nature of that. We see her in a bunny suit. We see her dressed up for Halloween. Nothing is going to keep her from going out trick-or-treating. And there's something especially poignant about that. So the threads, again, thinking about the thread and the knitting and the tatting, there's the thread of searching for the medicine. There's the thread of the characters in the waiting room. There's the thread of the emergence of the child, of the little girl in the bunny suit. These all come together. These all weave together. And then they're at the end, this didn't help. But maybe one thing that balances that is the sense of the connection, of the hug between the speaker and the friend. That is another kind of knitting together. And that's one
Is
of
it,
I'm
is
sorry,
it,
go ahead, Lloyd.
isn't making the poem a kind of
Absolutely.
knitting together?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most amazing things about Alice's work as a poet, and I think also her work as a fiction writer, is to take so many different things, so many different scenes, different people, um, things that seem completely disparate, and you figure out how do these things go together, and Alice does it. Alice pulls it off every time.
Can I just
Yes,
throw in
please.
something about the child? It struck me that she's all cute in this bunny suit, Halloween, and that, but it's double-edged. Halloween being what it is, about graves and skeletons and things like that. So we got both things going simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good to see you.
Hi, Lloyd.
And I think
Um,
Sharon had
yeah,
something to
Sharon,
add.
please.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. And thank you especially, Alice, for being here. And this reaction for me may sound more personal than literary. But there is this fantastic, understated um, punch in several places. Some people have already mentioned it. But first, where it's empty, I sit down. And the next thing is people enter in couples. And for me, what I hear is that this can be a very lonely um, journey.
Mm.
Uh, and having walked it with some family, it really, really struck me. And the same with we go into the next with all the colors and people are crafting and making and creating. And then there's only one reason to be here, which people have mentioned. And I just think it's great that it's its own line. And
Yeah.
it sits. There's only one reason to be here, and you're like, oh. The elevator door opens, the receptionist cries out before what we can see was there. And it's sort of like this is, for me, my experience within particular medical situation, that the emotions, you may be in one place, but suddenly you are jettisoned into something else over which you have no control.
Right.
Um, so I think there's this wonderful underlying sense of doing what you can do, but it also being out of my control as the reader. So thank you so much for this. It's really wonderful.
Um,
Yeah.
and something I think that's so striking about the very beginning of the poem. And I mean, we see the title, where there's a kind of tension in the title between the facility, the medical facility, and the holiday. Um, there's such a risk in writing a poem about illness and about cancer, especially, um, to be, to make it a kind of lament. Uh, it's it's awful, and we already know it's awful. So, as a as as a as a poet, uh, there's a challenge to make this. I mean, you obviously it's something you want to write about, especially if it's about a dear friend. But there's also a challenge to not to make it sentimental, not to just repeat the same kind of sadness that everyone feels in this situation. And I think it's that the beginning of the poem is really a surprise because the narrator of the poem is it it's it's not um it's not just saying this is a wonderful person and I'm so sorry that she's sick, but putting us in the middle of a situation of that's really annoying. It's the one thing you've asked for, your medicine now. And you can hear not just the voice of the narrator, but also the voice of the subject of the poem. And it's not a it's not a charming voice. It's not a pathetic voice. It's a demanding voice. And I think that just your medicine now, not hours from now, on the way home after this new rigmarole of your x-rays, tests, upstairs, downstairs, but I simply can't find a drugstore. And the frustration of the narrator and the insistence of the central subject of the poem seems very still, even how many years? 40, or is it 40 years after 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 this poem was written, it still feels to me very fresh, very honest,
Mhm.
totally unsentimental, and really we're living it with the we're living through it with the narrator. I don't know. Any
Sarah, I think wanted to add to that.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, please.
Hi, Lloyd. Hi,
Hi.
Malden Library. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks, Malden Library. Thanks, Alice, for this great poem. I just wanted to, there are a few things that I just really, really appreciated about this. Make sure my thing's up. Okay, that I really appreciated about your poem. And one is the emotional coherence of it. The overall, so it starts, so it's a great, narrative. It's an emotional narrative. And it starts with, I can't even find you again. I'm shown to still another waiting room. So in the beginning, it is always this emotional search for the comfort, and closes with the comfort. And so I love that opening of seeking and the closing with this moment of comfort. So, and I love the fact that it's not the disease, the illness is not the star of the show, but these little moments, which is a big thing with this machine, right? You get your minute with the machine. But what we really get, if we're very lucky, is minutes with comfort. And I like your use of color a lot, that it's pretty gray. Everything's full of color. Then suddenly comes the legal blindness. I love the handiwork. This tatting is actually about lace, right? But I love the handiwork and these minute, these little details that are moments of time, just moments of time strung together. And yet the tension between those moments of craft and the wonderful tone of the poem that tells me anyway, that these holidays, Halloween, Christmas, Easter, it is exquisitely unclear whether anybody in that waiting room, including the little girl, is going to see any of those holidays. Yet, preparing with the costume, preparing with tatting the bookmarks, etc. That's also what we do. So we do these small gestures with a view to a future that's uncertain. So I appreciate your skill in putting the mortality in the front, really, and longing. And the illness is not the star of the show, nor is the machine, nor is, I also appreciate, so I'll close by saying, I appreciate that moment of there's only one reason to be here. The elevator door opens, and I just so admire the receptionist cries out before we can see what's there. And by now we are attuned to the possibility that what's there could be, it's not going to be good, but it invites us to anticipate something grisly. And it's not, except it is potentially heartbreaking. So anyway, I appreciate the artistry here and the full intricacy of the color and the little tatting things, and how universal it is. It's not the illness, it's us, right? It's mortality and longing and moments of comfort. So thanks a lot for reading it.
Thank you. Susan, you have your
Yes. Hi. I also adored this poem. Thank you so much. I was captivated by this word rigmarole in the first stanza, because I feel like the whole poem became a rigmarole. And I started the first stanza, I was immediately interested, and then I felt stopped in my tracks by the waiting room and the whole discussion of the needlework, which was sort of funny, but was sort of beside the point, but kind of the point. And who are these people? And let's get back to them. And there was just this sort of movement or crazy ride through all of that narrative before we get, I know I'm in a hospital anymore. It's a little hard to describe that feeling. It's kind of frustration and fascination, and just wonderful.
Thank you. I'm gonna do something that I probably shouldn't do, which is I want to call on someone I know who I know loves poetry, but who is also a prose writer, wonderful prose writer, uh, uh, Joan Wickersham. And I'm so glad to see you today, and I'm very eager to know what your response to this poem is. You're muted, Joan.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'm
Hi.
so happy to be here and to see Alice. Hi, Alice. Um, I love the poem, and what I felt was that the poem is about the frustration and the panic and the sense of failure that happens when you're trying to accompany someone who's going through this, this mortal illness. And I felt like the I agree very much about the frustration in the beginning, but the whole thing to me feels like a nightmare. It's really like one of those dreams where you're trying to speak and nothing comes out of your mouth, and there's a sort of a failure to complete any action. The one thing that the friend has asked for is help with the medicine, and the narrator can't produce that help. And in the end, the friend is the one, the sick friend is the one that bursts in on the doctor and says, I want that prescription now. She has to do it herself. And I felt that the poem was very much about wanting to be there to accompany someone and having to deal with the pain of realizing that when it comes right down to it, that person is alone. And that person, no matter how much you want to accompany them, they're alone. And I thought the ending where you're trying to hug the friend to comfort her, and yet she's the only one that really has the authority. And I felt that in the end, there's really no comfort. But that the comfort really is the acknowledgement that there is no comfort, and that there is, which doesn't mean there isn't love. I agree with people that there's an enormous sense of love here, but I think the poem to me was very much about the sort of panicky, tragic recognition that in the end, the friend who's dying is the authority, and that no matter how much you love her, you can't ever fully get in there with her because she's the one who knows what's going on more than you do with all of your desire to help. So I thought it was a really deep, beautiful acknowledgement of that kind of separation between us and the dying friend at the same time that we're accompanying the dying friend.
Thank you. Yes, I, I agree with you. um, um, I, what about, I'd like to hear what some of the poets think about the way this is put together. Do you have
I think
any
my,
feelings about that? Oh, it's Mike. Hi. Yeah, hi.
you're muted, Mike.
Yeah, I got it there. I think I got it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a beautiful poem. I like the irregularity of the lining. So, um, it looks like the the author's it's a great admittance of I'm put in a place where I really don't know what's going on. It goes along with what Joan was saying. Um, I think the poem is about co-suffering, the helplessness of a partner or a loved one who is going through just such a terrible thing as this. And I made to think almost of Elizabeth Bishop's The Waiting Room, in the waiting room where And she's going to gain a little more distance by thinking of her aunt as foolish or whatever. But she's sitting there looking through this National Geographic, and then suddenly there's this utterance of pain from the next room. It's a dentist's room. And
Yeah.
what's so striking, I think, about the Bishop poem and this situation is that the child begins to say, oh, at the same time that she hears her aunt hollering in pain. And it's this co-sympathy, the co-suffering. And what you're suffering, though, you can't imagine the pain, perhaps the discomfort of one who is going through this kind of thing. The empathy is so profound. We are so profoundly knitted and very silently. And that compassion, that sympathy or empathy, where it's inescapable. It's inescapable, how others are feeling, and especially when we're helpless to do anything about it.
Mike, you started your comment with mentioning how much you like the irregularity of the lines, of the
Yes.
line breaks. And could you talk a little bit more about that? What's so interesting and what compelling and or what are those what does that irregularity contribute to the poem?
Well, to me,
I mean, let me just say, I mean, this could almost be a prose narrative,
Yes.
but it's not
mm,
really a poem.
yeah, there are line breaks, I think, that are very significant. And like you said, you have the one line stanza there that's very important. She's using space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you want to get down to the nitty
I
gritty
do.
and go to fisticuffs about what's poetry and what's prose,
Oh no, I don't want to do that.
it's gonna be as useless as any war that's going on in the globe right now. We're all just gonna be shaking our heads because there's no definition for it. But the fact that Alice put this in a poem and the fact that it looks like a poem, maybe you might mistake it for a poem by someone who's written 100 poems, and 100 poems isn't very many. Uh, but someone who's written between 20 and 100 poems and maybe is on the verge of trying to start their first stab at sonnets. But when you understand what's going on in the poetry, the line breaks make much more sense than such a young poet as I'm describing. But the overall look at it says, I'm writing a poem, but this is beyond poetry, really.
Mm.
Uh, and I
Mm.
think what it's saying is we're often, I mean, we like our poems to be about language and form and so forth, but poems about poetry, it's an American poem. It's something, it does to me what reading Whitman does to me after reading, Chaucer through Browning. You read tons and tons and tons of iambic pentameter, you know what poetry looks like. Then all of a sudden you look at Whitman and you're going, "Ooh,"
Yeah.
But it does
What?
it does that to me, but it justifies itself as a poem also because it's about the things that poets are talking about. It's distilled. Uh, the experiences seem very seminal and essential.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. But I'm also what are those what is that the irregularity of those lines? What else does it contribute to the poem?
It keeps you off balance.
Yes. Yeah. Uh it does, and it's an embodiment. I think that's exactly right. That it's an embodiment of the kind of tension in the poem that that situation is a situation that um I mean, the narrator of this poem, the poet in this poem, it, is never on top of the situation,
Right.
top of what's happening. So everything is kind of is unsettled,
Yes.
is surprising, and yes, I really like that image of being off balance, that 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 what can you do, and what's going to happen next, and that it's really, I mean, you look at the poem and the line breaks are really incredibly skillful,
Yes.
in terms of emphasis, in terms of the shape of the line. It's you know, it's a real poem. um but what those line breaks are doing is
Mm,
it's
yeah.
sort of it is putting you into the sort of experience of the poet herself, who is trying to figure out what she can do. Bill, um, you have your hand up, and hi, and
Yeah,
well,
no, I was just thinking that, if I could pick up a couple of points you've made.
sure,
On this one, which you're in the process of making, it seems to me not insignificant that we call such a margin, as is created by the variable line lengths, a ragged one. And ragged then
yeah,
sort of hooks up with the imagery of textiles and various kinds of handicraft and attempts to knit things together. And it's almost as if the raggedness of the margin um, images the difficulties with which the handiwork contends. Its attempts to create something more orderly and beautiful out of this refractory, intractable experience, which finds its expression in the ragged margin. Also, picking up your earlier point, excuse me, about the importance of avoiding the maudlin or the sentimental or the stock response, and the poems beginning with someone being in a flap and also a bit sort of irritated, as a way, in a sense, of preventing people from being too sugary sweet. That's, I think, nicely picked up also in the reference to tatting or tatting, the blind man with his sort of flaunted linguistic punctilio, putting down the person who fails to pronounce the word, becomes a faintly repellent figure, which, as it were, operates to offset the sentimentality which might otherwise pervade the poem. But I wonder, since we have the author here, whether I could ask a couple of questions. One is about the middle section of the poem, when the couple start entering and we're introduced to a flurry of characters. I'm not sure whether I experienced a difficulty which had to do with my incompetence as a reader, or whether it was, in a sense, designed for me to experience. I found it quite tricky to keep pace with who was who. There was the problem of, referring to the two men, the one accompanied by the woman in the poncho, and then the one who fussily pronounced tatting. I had to reread it several times to see it's being referred to, and that had the effect for me. And that might, as I say, that might have been a product of my just being less efficient as a reader than I ought to be. Maybe other people were capable of processing the data much more readily. But for me, it created a sort of tension between the smoothness of the narrative, the artistry which makes everything flow very easily and readily, and then this moment when we are, in a sense, forced to face up to the fact that it is a constructed entity, that there are the mechanics of putting it together. It's almost as if the mechanics have been obtruded, the difficulty of deciding how to refer to these people. Madam calls the gentleman, we don't exactly know which gentleman it is, because gentleman hasn't really, it could be either of them. Previously, we've just had the man with the woman in the poncho and the handsome man. Madam calls the gentleman. There's a kind of indeterminacy there, which is the product of, not having names at one's disposal and not knowing, therefore, how to refer to them. So it's almost as if there's a tension emerges between artifice, or the obtruded artifice, and the disguised or concealed artifice. And I wondered whether any of that was intentional, and whether I might ask Alice whether I'm entirely sort of pursuing some fanciful notion of my own, or whether any of that was contrived by her.
Let me say before, Alice is, I would love to hear Alice's own comments on this poem, but I'm wondering what anyone else feels about that that air of indeterminacy that you mention. I have a response to that too, but I'm wondering whether anyone else has any has any feeling about that. Nick, yeah.
Well, I had exactly the same experience. And I even went to the point of getting a separate piece of paper and trying to draw a diagram of who's who. And I did figure it out, but it took me a while. And I kept going back to it to say, am I sure? And I wonder if it was difficult, if it was intentional. I mean, was it part of the plan? Because was it deliberately a complicated thing you have to weave together on your own?
And I think we want to hear from Alice, but Sharon and Ginny, I think, would love to chime in before Alice.
Oh, Sharon, I didn't. Your your raised hand is on the screen, is right in front of I think it's a light on your ceiling, and it kind of, it makes it invisible to see. So I apologize for not seeing it, but thank you, Marita. But Sharon, yeah. So
yes, I just the idea of the being on already at a heightened level, and these people come in, and the beauty of these brief details, and for me, the confusion of maybe, okay, who is that person? Who is that person? Is part of this journey to just be present with the person you're there to be with, that this is all I'm ever going to know about these people. I'm never going to see them again. But these details and this confusion is a great part of setting the tone for me of the narrator. And in the end, getting to that point where it goes into the room to her person, and now there's a coupling of two people, and the only thing the person who is there as the narrator can do is be present.
Yeah.
And trying to hold on to that being present is constantly interrupted by everything that comes before it. So it's really well crafted.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think it's a tribute to the poem that some of you actually wanted a diagram who is saying what, and who each figure was. But I agree with you that, that's certainly my experience, is that you're in this room with these literally colorful characters, but you don't know who they are. And you kind of lose track of who's saying what. And that's part of the experience, the sort of frustration and the confusion, but also the colorfulness and the knitting together of the details. And Ginny, I don't want
Okay,
to talk
yeah,
too.
I'll try to be brief. I also had some confusion about the two gentlemen. And also, I was asking myself, do these people know each other? Have they met before? And I was a little confused about that. There seemed to be some clues that maybe they have. He's legally blind, unless that was part of a conversation during the waiting. But so there's that. And I think the poem has a lot of, some things are very general and some things are very specific. Like there are no names, but we have
Well,
these details
well,
about the people.
there's one name,
Oh, is there one name?
Betsy.
I think.
Aaron.
Oh, the child, the
Oh yeah,
child.
and
Yeah.
yes, right,
Okay.
and Karen. Yeah, the technician.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. So there are a couple of names, but then this is just part of. I mean, I like Mike's an reference to in the waiting room, and that the being in a waiting room, where whether you're in a dentist's office or in a radiation center in a hospital, there's always that same confusion. You don't know who the other people are, and that Hume, I know you have your hand up. I will, uh, but anyway, I I I think I'm just repeating myself. Hume.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to repeat actually what Jenny said. I also felt that there was perhaps an implication that the other two couples had known each other, that there was a sort of a community that had formed perhaps out of, weekly or perhaps even daily visits to the radiation lab, and that we were, kind of seeing that a little bit from the outside. Um, that's really all I had to say.
Well, they know the little girl.
Well, they also know the little girl, but the comment about, one the gentleman or
Right.
the other gentleman knows that the gentleman, quote, is legally blind. So they presumably had some kind of interaction previously.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's all part of that all seems to me part of the experience of, and it's sort of one of the discomforts, but also the sort of common experience of being in that situation where there's so much stuff going on around you, and if you're new to it, it's it's confusing to you, but you're taking in details, kind of memorable details of color and bits of conversation and attitude, um, toward the toward you know toward the people in the waiting room. Um, Bill, did you have a nut? I'm not avoiding asking Alice, but did you have
Oh no, no,
question?
yes, I also um, uh, was struck at the end by the way in which the raising of the question of the nature of the relationship between the I and the you in the poem, in a sense, alerted me to the fact that I'd failed to ask that question. We sort of we're introduced to them at the start, and then the you goes wandering and then comes back, and in the parenthesis, return is recorded. But because we've become so immersed in this little group of people and in the puzzle of trying to make sense of who's who and who's speaking at any given moment, we're almost inclined to forget about what, in a sense, we might imagine ought to be central, the nature of the relationship between the I and the you who were introduced at the outset, but only at the end, just before the hug, do we, does that issue come to the fore? And we, of course, it comes to the fore in a way which is partially revealing, but also holds information back. Okay, they're not family, so what exactly are they? But we never really know exactly what they are. All we end up knowing is that they are of different heights and that the different heights enables the poet to pull off that rather clever reversal at the end, whereby the hug in which the I offers comfort turns into a hug in which she receives it from the bigger person who, as it were, encompasses her. Yeah. Oh, so sorry, it was a question. And I suppose the question is, how much of that was also part of the poet's design? It may be that Alice, of course, has forgotten all these things, which were, very much part of her thinking at the time. But I suppose, as did you say it was written 40 years ago? I guess I'm not a writer myself, but I imagine that when you're reading a poem of your own written 40 years ago, you have kind of turned into another reader and almost forget of your own status as the author. So maybe she can't just instantly reveal what she was thinking about at the time. But I'd like to know how much of that was, as it were, part of her thinking, if it's at all possible for her to.
Well, that's the question that only Alice can answer.
Yes,
but I also just wanted to, just as another footnote to a previous element of the conversation, that there is another name in the poem, and it's in the subtitle.
For Kate.
That we know that the person that Alice, or the poet, is trying to help is Kate, and that she's not an anonymous figure. She is a person, and we don't know exactly who she is, but I think we can make certain fairly good assumptions about this person being not family, so must be a friend. I think that has to be the answer. Alice, do you want to say anything or ask anything?
Sure. Thank you. These reactions are so thoughtful and generous. I'm very grateful. Bill is correct. I mean, I don't remember writing the poem. So I can't tell you what was intentional, other than that I've never wanted to be unclear in all of the writing I've ever done. That I know some people like to do that, to be unclear. I do not. I want to be clear. On the other hand, as I think Lloyd or somebody said at some point, I'm always drawn to excessively complicated situations. I have a need to write about something that's too complicated to be written about in the form in which it exists. And this would be hard to do in a story. I mean, I guess it's such a long time since I wrote the poem that I feel I can, as you say, I'm just another reader, and I think it's pretty good. And I'm kind of impressed with what I was able to get in. I think it might have been one of the last poems I wrote before I gave up. And I mean, I didn't give up on poetry, but it stopped coming to me. But I was moving more and more toward situations in which there were a lot of characters, and I'm very drawn to situations that have that complexity of boring regular life, like the problem with the prescription. I like writing about that kind of thing, but it is confusing. It's hard to make it clear. I've always been trying to make it clear, so I think I can say that at the time I was trying to be clear. The gentleman is, I'm pretty certain that I used the word gentleman just for the more formal guy, the one with the elevated speech and the voice like a Christmas caroler. He's the gentleman, and the other one is just the man. So, yeah, what struck me looking at it was that the man obviously knows the gentleman, the man who's with the lady in the poncho has had previous conversations. And I do think it becomes clear in the poem that all these people have become a community, and they all know Betsy, and they know one another. And I guess that would happen if you had all the people who have Tuesday appointments show up at the same time. But for Kate, it was new. It's called a new rigmarole. And and I had certainly never been there. I do vaguely, slightly remember the incident that inspired the poem, but I do not remember my actual writing of the poem.
Yeah.
But thank you all so much. It's just wonderful. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Alice. Yeah, as I say, I really
Oh,
love this.
and they are friends. They're friends. I think
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I knew Kate, but but I could tell from the poem that, that you were friends. You wouldn't do this we know she's not family, and you wouldn't, the, I'm going to say you wouldn't do this for anyone who is less than a friend.
Yeah.
And
it's clearly we're not close enough to be partners or, yeah.
right,
I think
right.
it's clear we're friends.
I think oh, Marita, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was, in the sense that, Alice, um, I felt like I was the narrator of this. You made me feel like I was that voice, and I had those feelings of being the anxiety of being in that room alone, trying to find the prescription, get the prescription filled, and take in all that. And I I felt like I was feeling all those emotions that the narrator was describing, and that was pretty unique. And I appreciate that. And it's super sad and super beautiful at the same time, with the everyday feelings of all these bombardments of different people that you just take in. So I just wanted to say thank you.
I think that's
Marita,
lovely, actually. Thank you.
Marita, yeah, thank thank you. Um, uh, I think that's exactly right, and that what's really one of the things that's so wonderful about this poem is that, I think I tried to say this earlier, that we are so with the person who is writing about this, that we are with her experiences at every moment, and the frustration, the confusion, and then the tremendous sense of sadness. I mean, I think that line, um, near at the end of the beginning of the last stanza, the medicine won't help, and that just deep sense of of helplessness and sadness, and where this is all going to end, except you don't know where the poem is going to end. You don't know where the poem is going to end, and that ending just seems very extraordinary to me, and memorable, and really profound and profoundly insightful about the relationship, about the whole situation. And I am, I don't know how many times I've read this poem, but I am always just completely kind of surprised and then moved by that ending. Um, um, uh, I, I, Gail, I think there was a little comment by you, which of course I couldn't read. I couldn't read because it went by so fast. But did you want to say anything, Gail?
No, I just wrote something on the chat.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, Jennifer, I can now see you. Um, any sort of
Well,
final
I'm
thought?
thinking about the end
of the poem, that last stanza, and how it seems to me um, it kind of intensifies the shifting back and forth between different kinds of concerns. The shifts or the interruption of one thing with another seem to me to come more quickly. And what I mean is it carries the sort of errand mindset. Where am I going to get the medicine? Not here, not there. This person can't do it. That person can't do it. With the larger time frame of we get the medicine at the end of the penultimate stanza, but the medicine won't help, nor will the treatment. And then almost irrelevantly, you don't even know how to knit. And I do, but I'm slow. And then for me, it's the line, if I started for you, a sweater for you, it wouldn't be finished in time. And you're so tall too. That is the shifts back and forth between one kind of task or one kind of time frame speed up in the last stanza. All of it sort of asking a question. So what do we do? What can I do? How and it ends in an embrace. That's what you can do. But that's my 2 cents about the way the
Right.
more slowly unbalancing sections, more narrative or dramatic, straightforward sections of the rest of the poem come down to something that's more internal in the last stanza of the narrator quickly shifting back and forth between these or being unbalanced by these different kinds of concerns.
One of the lines in the poem that just really gets to me, and that I sort of know why, and then I find very mysterious, is the line, "You don't even know how to knit." And I think somehow that all the stuff about knitting and tatting that has come before, um, and then knit has a kind of double meaning. And um, and it seems to me that the line itself and bringing in that line and having that image of knitting come back at the end is um, I don't know. It just it's funny. I mean, there's a certain irony, kind of comic irony. You don't even know how to knit, with all this stuff going on about knitting, but also knitting in terms of, you know, in terms of health, in terms of survival. Don't, I mean, what do we do if we don't know how to knit? Susan, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this. See, that for me is small talk. And the conversation in the waiting room was small talk about knitting and tatting and so forth. And I felt that's where the tension is, that the small talk is a way of not talking about what's really happening, sickness and illness and death and dying, because it's just unbearable. But the small talk becomes unbearable to me.
Yeah. But unbearable in the sense of moving and of being moved by it.
No, not being moved, but of resorting.
Yeah.
Pulling back to try to make conversation about something.
Yes.
Because who cares, really?
Right. Yeah.
About tatting.
Right. Except the tatter.
Well, yeah, but it's like
Ginny, you're muted. You're muted. Ginny, you're muted.
I found that stanza very comforting. I feel that was escape. And it
Yeah.
seems, yeah, there's no harm in escaping because you can't be thinking all the time that I'm dying or my friend is dying. So I felt just fine with that. And I found it, the people were colorful, not just the colors of the clothes, but the people were engaging. I was curious, that. Yeah. There's this, between the tatting and the medicine, the title says Hunter Radiation. I don't know if that is a real place. Maybe it is. But there's this interesting tension between the long-standing, like we were once hunter-gatherers in old form, in radiation, this highly developed, man-made technology, but it's not always, doesn't always work, unfortunately. So I liked in the title Hunter Radiation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I never thought of that. Thank you. Any final comments? We have to leave in a couple of minutes, but I don't know, Pat, I'm so glad to see you. And where are you now?
I'm in Chicago.
In Chicago, yeah. And any thoughts about the poem? I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
Oh, well, I am involved as probably many of us are
Mm-hmm.
with similar situations.
Yep.
And this is, and in fact, just wrote a poem very like this, but but I have learned it was sentimental. One of the parts that I liked so very much, and I'm now trying to move my screen so that I can get to the poem. Anyway, the reference to how the difference in the height and the need to continue knitting because she's so tall. I love this kind of a moment of kind of irritated amusement in the face of the face of the great emotion.
Yes.
So here we all are.
Here we all are. Yeah. John, any can I any last thoughts? John?
You talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I've been sitting here, agreeing with everything that's being said, except that these people really, when they come into this room, they become a family. And when they leave, they stop being a family. And so they sort of exhibit all the qualities of being a family, of making sort of semi-pissy comments you don't even know, knitting. But it's also comforting to see that, and at the same time discomforting to see that people come together to be human with each other. And the ending is with the person who is sick comforting the person who isn't sick, which is always really what happens in a good way. And that to me is really reaffirming, and it's a great way to end the poem.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Alice, any last words before we leave?
No, I'm just very grateful to all of you.
They're really smart, this group.
Yeah, they really are.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the poem, and thank you for reading the poem. Thank you for being here and talking to us. And thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed this discussion, and I'm sorry I was invisible. If I weren't, you would have seen me nodding in agreement to everything that you were saying. So thank you very much, and Marita, again, thank you. Maybe we should have a little meeting in which we try the Zoom again and
Yeah,
see if we can get my video to work.
absolutely. We'll talk.
Okay.
And you guys, everybody, thank you so much, Lloyd, for being here. And thanks for the patience with the technical difficulties. We'll be meeting again Saturday, December 7th. I'll send out a reminder, but thank you, everyone. These conversations are beautiful and they're really valuable. So I'm glad you could all make it. Lloyd, good luck. And Alice, thank you. And we'll be in touch.
Great. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.